Hey everybody, for some reason I have been really into the whole Star Wars situation lately. I'm not sure why. And at first I was going to do an alternate version of episode 9, but YouTube doesn't like when you take a long time to make videos like that. And on top of it, I realized that there were so many problems that it might be better to just do a video or two videos talking about all those things. So let's do that. Now first, there were a lot of concerns, I think, with both the way they approached it and in the way they actually executed it, in the way the movies were made. So I think we could potentially do a video on both, and I want to start out by talking about the approach to the movies. Okay, first let me say that I feel bad for them. Obviously they have a lot of money, so that might be a little silly to say, but I want them to do well. I'm a fan of Star Wars, and I'd like for them to be successful with it. And the position they're in right now is a really unfortunate position because I don't see how you bring it all together. And right now they have all this pressure on them and the eyes of the world focused on this next movie with people's careers riding on it. But let's at least look at how we got to this place. First, movies are really fragile. Even though they seem automatic once they're done, there's a ton of ways you can mess it up. I always like to say that there's 100 ways to make a good movie, but 1,000 ways to make a bad one. But I'll give you an example. I did a fantasy movie where two James Bonds fight each other, and I added a comment to it afterwards where I outlined a bunch of things. It probably seems pretty straightforward when you see it, but there were a lot of things that have to be balanced. And I don't think you know that unless you've gone through the process of trying to write something and seeing how people react to it. And you have to be really careful when you put it in the hands of somebody who doesn't realize those pitfalls are there. The first time I watched The Force Awakens, the new movie in the Star Wars trilogy, I thought they knew that. Because, if nothing else, they clearly were aware of how much was riding on that movie. To me, it was like watching someone tap dance with a gun to their head. They made a couple changes, but they were very calculated changes. And with the formula, they were so scared of making a mistake that they just basically copied Episode 4, A New Hope. Even to the point that it didn't even make sense given what happened already because there was no more Empire. And I think audiences can sense that when you're uptight like that, and it really affects your creativity. So I think the movie was functional, but it missed a lot of potential. And we'll go into detail on all those things later. The important thing though is that if you spend $4 billion to acquire a property, and I don't know what they're budgeting these movies at now, $200 or $300 million, you have to do something different. You're not going to get the same emotional effect out of showing people the same thing. And I know that it helps to play it safe, but if you really want to create something that's going to take this franchise forward and bring audiences back and do all those things they wanted to do, you're going to have to introduce new things, you're going to have to introduce a new formula, and it's going to have to work. It's going to require someone who respects the audience and respects the material. And I don't know if that's going on there right now.
At the audition, you weren't a Star Wars aficionado.
I haven't seen any of the Star Wars films.
Not a single one. That's a disgrace.
The person who's the head producer, I don't know if she really is a fan of Star Wars. It honestly doesn't seem like it. And that's very, very dangerous because when you put people in charge of something who don't get joy out of watching the finished product, they're going to do things that make them feel good that are unrelated to the quality of the product and threaten the quality of the product. Like pushing their points of view on other things, casting their friends, and other stuff like that. A company is only as good as their highest level decision maker. And if that person isn't fit to be doing it, they should hire someone who is and let them make the decisions. If they interfere, you tend to get bad results. And so we ended up in this situation where we had this big machine in place that didn't have an engine. Where you have the merchandise, you have all these things going on, the marketing, pushing it, but they took for granted that the movie was going to be good because they saw all those things surrounding Star Wars to begin with, but all those things played off of the emotional attachment that people had to those first 3 movies. And if you don't deliver, if you don't make something that creates that attachment, you're not going to have that central driver that's going to make people want to have all those other things. And they were also behind the 8 ball to begin with because they were going to have a hard time recreating the magic of Star Wars, no matter how good they did. Because Star Wars was a peak experience for the audience members. It wasn't just how incredibly well executed those first movies were. It was other little things, like the fact that they aged with their audience. A New Hope is for people of a certain age group, and Empire Strikes Back is of a darker and slightly more mature tone. but not in a scary or depressing way, which is a common mistake. It's kind of amazing how perfectly executed so many things are with those movies. But the same kids who were maybe 13 or 14 when Star Wars came out were 16 or 17 when Empire Strikes Back came out. And that's one of the major things that creates that effect. And the sense of community around Star Wars, all the fan properties and conventions and all those other things, create that personal connection that people have as well. You have all those things in place, all those outside emotional elements, but once those are there, the thing that breaks the tie, which we've talked about, is how good the movie is itself. That's the thing that people are going to judge you on. And that puts a huge amount of extra pressure on the actual quality of the movie. And that meant that they really, really had to deliver. And to be honest, I don't know if you could, because it was probably fluky how well those first few movies worked. But in the process of making those movies, they did come up with a number of things that didn't go well, which they would need to address to have a chance of fixing episode 9, which will give you an idea of just how much work would be in front of them. And we'll do that one next, so stay tuned for it.